A federal court recently ruled that the Biden administration overstepped or stepped on the First Amendment by manipulating social media platforms during the COVID pandemic.
How important do you see this case in terms of a free speech case?
This is the most important First Amendment case in a generation.
The only pandemic we have is among the unvaccinated.
This week, we talk with the Attorney General behind the lawsuit and why we should all be concerned about the government managing the message.
America's schools are facing a critical shortage of teachers.
When we hire teachers, when we can hire teachers, one of the things that we hear is that it's unaffordable for teachers to live in Chino Valley.
Does this bring them in?
We hope so.
We look at a program where offering tiny houses to teachers may have a big impact in the classroom.
Many of us wonder just why corporations are stepping into social causes.
In order to appease the woke mob, these corporations feel that they need to weigh in on contentious legislation and cultural issues.
This week, we talk with one man who is behind the campaign to go woke and maybe has a few regrets. Welcome to Full Measure. I'm Sharyl Attkisson. We begin with one of the most heated controversies of our time, the battle to control our information. Our government, federal agencies, and media have grown more heavy-handed than ever, going so far as to smear and cancel opponents and censor true information they just don't like. The battles have played out on social media and on the internet and in presidential politics. For the first time ever, the courts have now determined that the White House and top American agencies violated free speech tenets at the very heart of the U.S. Constitution. Today, we're off to Missouri to hear from a key figure in the landmark case. How important do you see this case in terms of a free speech case?
This is the most important First Amendment case in a generation.
Andrew Bailey is Attorney General for Missouri, which filed the landmark censorship lawsuit against the Biden administration. In July of 2021, President Biden made an unprecedented accusation. He said social media companies were killing people if they allowed what the government deemed to be COVID misinformation that often turned out to be true.
They're killing people. I mean, it really, look, the only pandemic we have is among the unvaccinated, and they're killing people.
White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki added that government officials were coordinating with social media companies to block certain content.
We're flagging problematic posts for Facebook that spread disinformation.
Can you kind of summarize the genesis of the challenge?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Jen Psaki from the White House press secretary's podium established and committed to making sure that big tech social media were clamping down on misinformation, malinformation, information essentially that the White House didn't like. And so that piqued everyone's interest, and we began to realize very quickly that there was a coercive and collusive relationship between the White House across a spectrum of federal bureaucratic agencies with their cronies and woke big tech social media corporations.
Here in Missouri, they've partnered with the state of Louisiana to not only challenge the past actions of the Biden administration, but also to get an order to permanently block the government from similar censorship activities, along with a mechanism to monitor and enforce it. Under the lawsuit process known as discovery, Missouri and Louisiana have been able to get tens of thousands of pages of previously secret documents from the Biden administration.
And we have specific emails where the White House is targeting conservative voices and silencing conservative voices on big tech social media in violation of the First Amendment.
There were also documents showing White House Digital Director Flaherty scolding Facebook, saying that he really couldn't care less about products unless they're having a measurable impact at suppressing speech. When you say products, he's probably talking about tools being used by Facebook. Can you explain more about that email?
Yeah, that might be one of the most frightening emails we've uncovered, because what it's saying is big tech social media saying, well, the speech that the White House is targeting doesn't actually violate big tech social media's left-wing censorship priorities. And the White House pushed them further. So again, that just establishes the coercive and collusive relationship between the White House and unelected federal bureaucrats and their cronies and woke big tech social media corporations.
Maybe one of the most alarming ones to people who believe in free speech and think that some of the censorship is off base. In an email, Facebook assured the White House's Flaherty that in addition to removing what they considered vaccine misinformation, we've been focused on reducing the virality of content discouraging vaccines that does not contain actionable misinformation, including often true content. That seems to be admission that they were purposefully censoring truthful information.
That's absolutely right. They're trying to achieve a policy objective, a social objective, and they're going to coerce big tech social media and to go further than the corporation's natural left-leaning censorship policies. And it's the White House doing it.
Other startling evidence of government censorship has emerged. After Elon Musk bought Twitter, he released internal documents revealing the FBI and other agencies pressuring Twitter to ban and censor accounts. The Biden administration also created an Orwellian titled Disinformation Governance Board to crack down further on speech it didn't like. Appointed to head the agency was Nina Jankowicz, a Ukrainian government advisor who falsely claimed that reporting on Hunter Biden's laptop was Russian disinformation. And she made a quirky video that raised eyebrows.
When Rudy Giuliani shared bad intel from Ukraine, or when TikTok influencers say COVID can cause pain, they're laundering disinfo and we really should take note and not support their lies with our wallet, voice or vote. Oh, information.
Jankowicz and her Disinformation Governance Board were abandoned after criticism from both parties. This year, on the 4th of July, the judge in the Missouri lawsuit temporarily banned certain federal officials from colluding with social media while the full case was being decided. Judge Terry Doty wrote, "The evidence produced thus far depicts an almost dystopian scenario. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the United States government seems to have assumed a role similar to an Orwellian Ministry of Truth. And although the censorship alleged in this case almost exclusively targeted conservative speech, the issues raised herein go beyond party lines. The right to free speech is not a member of any political party and does not hold any political ideology." A 3-judge federal appeals court recently agreed the Biden administration ran afoul of the First Amendment and blocked the White House, Surgeon General, CDC, and FBI from violating free speech rights by coercing social media companies to take down posts the government doesn't like. Defendants and their employees and agents shall take no actions to coerce or significantly encourage social media companies to remove, delete, suppress, or reduce, including through altering their algorithms, posted social media content containing protected free speech, reads the decision.
There is an argument where people say, social media, they're private companies, they can do what they like, it doesn't amount to censorship. What's your response to that?
Well, we reject that, and certainly the courts have rejected that as well. Let's put it in perspective here. If you picked up your cell phone and made a call and were talking to somebody about a political issue and the cell phone company didn't like it and they started muting you when you were saying things they didn't like, would anyone stand for that? Would anyone accept that? Certainly not. That's what big tech social media does when they censor. But what I'm talking about here and what this case is exposed is infinitely worse, because the censorship is the muting essentially is being done at the behest of the federal government.
The Missouri versus the Biden administration lawsuit continues, with the state seeking a permanent ban of government collusion with social media to censor. Ahead on Full Measure, a teacher incentive that comes in small packages. Across the country, schools and families are grappling with critical shortages of qualified teachers. Scott Thuman takes us to Arizona, where they're trying out a solution with a little creativity.
Summer would usually leave the grounds of Del Rio Elementary in Chino Valley, Arizona, as quiet as the school library. But this year, the sound of construction breaks that silence. Not for new classrooms, but for 10 tiny homes tucked right behind the soccer field.
Right now we're standing on the footprint of what will eventually be our teacherage. If you're familiar with the term parsonage, which is housing for a reverend or pastor, it's the same thing. Teacherage is just housing for teachers. The white lines are the water and the green is the septic, and we're walking.
John Scholl is the school superintendent here, and this project is his response to a crisis hitting districts across the country. A shortage of certified teachers, from math to science, and especially special education.
20% of our kids are identified as special ed. Trying to serve those kids on what their needs require can be difficult when we don't have the staff to do that.
Scholl believes these homes could be the recruitment tool he needs to bring teachers to this rural town where housing costs are almost 50% above the national average.
When we hire teachers, when we can hire teachers, one of the things that we hear is that it's unaffordable for teachers to live in Chino Valley. The average home price in Chino Valley is about $450,000.
Does this bring them in?
We hope so. One candidate that applied just because they knew that we had this.
And so far, giving the idea an A+.
I want to say there's between 50 and 60 teachers here.
Amanda Schumacher teaches third grade here and is on a waiting list to call one of the tiny homes her home.
I live with my parents, and I've lived with my parents my whole life. I would love to be on my own, and the fact that I can't really afford to move out just on my own, I think that just helps so much.
Is it that needed? Is it that hard to afford a house?
It is that hard to afford a house. I mean, if you're not making six figures or over here, it's hard. It's very hard.
Chino Valley is one of at least 8 school districts in Arizona with plans to build so-called workforce housing. The project is being paid for with federal tax dollars from COVID relief funds and a state grant. At least 3 other states in the country have similar programs, and others are considering it. Whether or not this plan is ultimately a success may not be clear for a while, but it does speak to that much larger problem, a critical teacher shortage all across the country. Some 300,000 teachers leave the profession every year, and there are fewer college graduates with education degrees to fill those ranks. And low pay, the biggest reason. The average starting salary for a teacher in the U.S. is just below $43,000 a year.
There's always an excuse as to why we can't pay educators more money.
Marisol Garcia is president of the state's largest teachers union.
I think the biggest challenge is the fact that a lot of our educators going into the profession is pay, right? That they're your first generation college graduate, you want to be able to afford your own apartment or home.
Is it realistic to think it's going to get better?
It's not going to get better without a massive disruption in the conversation about funding education and making sure that educators feel respected. This didn't happen overnight. I see it more as a repercussion of neglecting of investment in public schools and public good.
In the meantime, she worries these tiny homes could lead to big problems.
I understand the impulse to want to be creative to fix 2 solutions, but I also have concerns that this puts educators in a really unique situation where your landlord is also your boss. If I get in trouble or if something happens or I'm accused of something, that I could lose not only my job but also the place where I live.
But it's a decision Schumacher is willing to embrace. It'd be quite the improvement for your commute.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I could walk to work. That'd be great.
These 400 square foot homes will be available in the fall and rent for about $500 per month, roughly half of the market rate in Chino Valley, and meant to be transitional housing, giving a new teacher a year or 2 to find something permanent.
Younger teachers like me that are kind of just getting established, we all agree that it's an amazing opportunity. It's just a way to get you started out there and just off on the right foot versus struggling and worrying. We're all very impressed by what's going on.
If enough prospective teachers give it a passing grade and sign on for jobs, the district stands ready to build more, redefining what it means to be a school house. For Full Measure, I'm Scott Thuman in Arizona.
Whether it's Target or Bud Light, companies are going woke. Coming up on Full Measure, a man who helped start the trend now has a change of heart. The practice of corporations weighing in on social and political controversies, almost always on the side of the left, is commonplace and drawing plenty of controversy. Today, a confession from someone who says he helped start the trend and now wants to say, "I'm sorry."
I think right there in a nutshell, you have everything that is wrong with woke corporate America. In order to appease the woke mob, these corporations feel that they need to weigh in on contentious legislation and cultural issues.
Gregory Angelo says, regrettably, he was a Frankenstein who helped create the woke corporate monster. It started in 2013. Angelo was president of the Log Cabin Republicans, which represents gays in the GOP. The group was lobbying Congress to pass the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, making it illegal to fire someone based on sexual orientation. Take me back to that time and explain what you were doing.
At the time, one of the lobbying strategies that we had was to lean on corporate America, the thinking being that if corporations announced their support for this legislation, weighed in on it, that Republicans that might have been waffling on this issue but have received corporate support from these major corporations who would be coming out in support of this legislation, that would be the thumb on the scale that would get them to yes.
Take me inside a room that you were in one of these meetings. What kind of corporations were there? What were they saying to you and what were you saying to them?
I'll never forget a meeting that I had with the Director of Government Affairs for one of the country's largest airlines and the chief lobbyist for one of the country's largest hotel chains. The strategy, of course, was pressuring companies, the whole right side of history argument, saying that if you don't come out and support this legislation, it will be a PR nightmare for you. People will notice if you have all these other corporations that are supporting this legislation, but you are not, people are going to start asking questions. And if you truly support the LGBT community, you need to come out in support of this legislation.
It worked. Angelo says his group's pressure on corporations and theirs on Republicans in Congress helped pass the Employment Non-Discrimination Act in 2013. Since then, corporations have increasingly weighed in on social and political controversies, almost always on the side of the left. And now Angelo is president of a different group, the New Tolerance Campaign, whose mission is to push back against woke corporations. So when was it that you started to think maybe the activism you had taken part in was not the right thing to do?
Yeah, I'll tell you a funny story. I went out for coffee with a colleague of mine and told him that one of the things we're doing at New Tolerance Campaign is fighting back against woke corporations. And he says, cool. But didn't you kind of start all of that?
I got some Bud Lights for us.
There's been recent backlash over Bud Light's collaboration with a social media star who chronicles living his life as a woman. There was Target's display of gay-themed merchandise, sometimes in the children's section, and tuck-friendly bathing suits that make women's swimwear easier for men to wear. Angelo says he wasn't first or the only one to press corporations into activism, but that he did play a role and now regrets it.
In fact, I was an insider when it came to leaning on corporations to weigh in on contentious cultural issues, and in some ways started this fire that we are presently starting to put out.
He says he's sorry and now fighting to reverse course.
But there's no one that has actually come forward and said, I was in the room, I helped start all of this, and I have that knowledge that got us into it, I can help get us out of it.
You've described what you're doing now as penance, paying penance.
I think that in order to make amends for the time that I was working unintentionally to create this current woke landscape, I think telling my story as an insider and also rallying everyday Americans behind the New Tolerance Campaign to push back against these corporations is something that can turn the tide.
There are a growing number of anti-woke lawsuits, legal challenges to corporate efforts to promote political and social agendas that sometimes hurt their own bottom line. After a break, an update on San Francisco's gritty Tenderloin district. An update now to our reporting on San Francisco's troubled Tenderloin district, where residents say authorities tolerate open-air drug dealing. We first visited the Tenderloin about a year and a half ago and saw rampant crime, homelessness, drug addiction, and no apparent efforts to stop it. A neighborhood so rough that our drive-by after dusk drew a violent response.
Go! What was that? What was that? I don't know. Go.
A chunk of wood hurled through the rear window of our van. Catherine Vaughn is a native San Franciscan.
Teach you be good. Good girl.
Once homeless, she's now among the low-income residents living in an apartment partly paid for by the government in the city's Tenderloin district.
It's really gone downhill. Constant garbage in the streets, people laying around on the front of the building shooting up, people passed out on the streets.
A short walk from City Hall, the famously gritty Tenderloin district in San Francisco was long known best for its trendy restaurants, jazz clubs, art, and historic theaters. Today, it's become infamous as an open-air market for drug dealers and users. On our last visit to the Tenderloin earlier this year, residents told us the most blighted strip had been dispersed and things might be improving. But it's clear the issues continue. In April, California Governor Gavin Newsom toured the neighborhood and promised the state would help clean things up.
Please, my name is J.J. Smith, and I want to know what you want to do about the fentanyl epidemic.
Tell me what we need to do.
That was followed by a town hall meeting over the summer with residents again demanding change from city leaders. In one day recently, 2 people were shot and 2 people were stabbed. An investigation by the San Francisco Chronicle revealed Honduran drug dealers have moved in and dominate the fentanyl trade in the Tenderloin district, dubbing it $1 Million Mile. And we'll continue following developments. Coming up next week on Full Measure, you could say Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has presidential politics in his blood. But this is the first time he's running to become commander-in-chief. He's challenging President Biden for the nomination, with the Democrat Party officially trying to sideline him. We'll hear his views on government corruption, vaccine dangers, and what's become of the Democrat Party. He's next in our series of Full Measure interviews with 2024 presidential candidates. Next week on Full Measure. Until next time, we'll be searching for more stories that hold powers accountable. Thanks for watching. I'm Sharyl Attkisson.